wisdom,
prudentia,
justice,
justitia,
temperance,
temperantia,
courage.
fortitudo.
Applying ancient philosophy to modern life, this is the Sunday Stoic.
Before the show begins, I need to thank the following: Adam, Alex, Ben, Brian, Carlos, Kat, Chad, Chris, Dan, David L., David V., Donald, Russo, Eric, Ernie, Jason, Jed, Joel, Juan, Kate, Kelly, Mark, Mohammed, Nick, Nicole, Polly, Patrick, Reese, Rick, that's Rick A., Rick P., Stu, Tara, Tom, Tribal Lion, and Y Yang 42. These patrons keep the lights on and keep the show going. Thank you for your support. Without your help, there would just be dead air. Well, folks, this is the last day of my 30s. When this episode airs, Groundhog Day here in the U.S., that's my last day in my 30s. Tomorrow when I wake up, I'll be in my 40s, and that's kind of weird. How did that happen? I mean, I always knew it was going to happen. I mean, what's the alternative, right? The alternative is that you die, and then you're done. And I can think of several people that I know personally that didn't make it this far. And of course, if you look historically, a whole lot of the world hasn't made it this far. So I should consider myself quite fortunate. But it is a big milestone in our culture, and it has weighed on me a bit because I definitely have less time in front of me than I have behind me. And that's, I don't know how, I mean, it just happened so fast. It's true. Time flies. And I know those of you who are beyond me in years are probably rolling your eyes now, but it is a milestone, and it is something to think about. And those of you who are in your 20s, or wherever you are approaching 40, it happens. It does happen. And time does seem to speed up as you go, and it will happen to you as well. So I'm going to just reflect on my first 40 here and think of some things philosophically. But before we do, I want to think about how I want to set the tone for the next however long I have. And we're going to have a quote from On the Shortness of Life from Seneca that kind of relates to my theme, Carpe Diem. He says, "Even though you seize the day, it will still flee. Therefore, you must vie with time's swiftness in the speed of using it. And, as from a torrent that rushes by and will not always flow, you must drink quickly." So, seize the day, but seize it like crazy when you still have the energy and time ahead of you to take full advantage of everything you can, because it rushes by in a torrent. Take it in as well as you can. But remember, seizing the day doesn't always mean being busy. As Seneca would say, the man who is busiest is often the least busy with living. You have to think about your priorities in life and focus on those things so that you know on your deathbed you have as few regrets or no regrets, if at all possible. I also want to think about Epictetus. And Epictetus reminds us to think of our roles in life and focus on those. Rather than focus on the sage, the wise, perfect one, focus on what your roles are and how would the ideal you live up to those roles, and then try to do that. So for my next day or 40 years or however long I have left, my thoughts are to live it up as well as I can, do the things I want to do that are within my power to do, and those things that fortune allows me to do. What are those things? Well, to be present, to improve in my attitude, in my reduce my anger, reduce my dependence on material possessions, and perhaps to travel. I would very much like to see my family's village in the Czech Republic, where my grandma came from. I'd like to see I'd like to hit Australia one day. I'd like to do several things. I would also like to live up to my roles and be a better teacher. I'd like to be as much of an expert educator as I can, and I would also, most importantly, want to be the best father and husband that I can, and start turning that inner reflection that I've been doing a lot of reflecting, a lot of thinking, and start to move that mirror so that my light shines outward rather than inward, if that makes sense. To start helping out with those around me, starting at home more and more, and expanding into my community, those around me. Not to mention the Stoic community at large, of course. I hope this podcast is sort of a way of doing that. But to expand my sphere of influence from self-improvement to helping the world. I think that an imperfect fool who helps society, helps the world, has lived a better life than the sage who doesn't ever interact with anyone. So I want to keep that in mind. And one issue I've had is, it's just amazing to me how I read these different blogs, self-help or self-improvement or whatever, and almost all of it, it's like I already know that. It's just reminding myself of it and living up to it. It's almost all in Stoicism. Discursiveness in reading, for example. Rather than thinking that happiness lies in the next blog post that someone wrote, or the next episode of someone else's podcast, or the next book that I can buy, knowing that actually just living up to a few goals is superior than just reading about thousands of non-ending goals. There's always a new goal, just like there's always new possessions. There's always new ways of approaching life. You already know some of the best ways. It's time to stop taking in the fire hose of information, picking a couple things, and getting to work. And that's what I'd like to think about for the next 40. And I'm not sure how to apply that fully to the podcast. If there are things that you feel would be awesome for this show, a direction for this show to take. I'm only one person, and I can't brainstorm all the time. So I'm happy to hear ideas if there are things that you think that society would benefit from via this podcast. As for the previous 40, I can say that I'm fortunate to be here. I was born early in 1980, the year 1980. I was only 3 pounds 6 ounces, which is not the tiniest, of course, but my parents didn't get to hold me for about a month or two, and I was hooked up to machines. Maybe I'll put a picture of new Steve on Twitter as a reminder to myself how fortunate I am to have lived a day, let alone to have lived till now. Had a good childhood with parents that were together, and I didn't know it, but we were somewhat on the poor side when I was a kid, but we did okay. And my brother was born when I was about almost 7, and we fought like cats and dogs for a while as he grew up, and then we eventually became bonded together like brothers, and helped out on the family farm. I worked at a grocery store as a kid. While I was a teenager, packing up groceries and taking them out to cars, and eventually, stocking shelves. That was my life. Growing up on the farm, on riding dirt bikes and going hunting with my dad, and occasionally helping on my uncle with farm chores and things like that. And eventually I went off to college, and I studied wildlife management and botany, and ended up as an environmental consultant at Fort Knox, and eventually went to Alberta, Canada for a grad degree, and then became a teacher. That's the condensed bio of your host here. But a few things, these are just simple, these are just trivial things, but things that help me, are things that I think I applied some Stoicism to growing up, and some things I didn't do as well at. But I had luckily no terrible afflictions in my life, right? I can't say that I fought any major battles, but just little things that I thought were a big deal at the time was when I was 19, I started going bald, right? And that was hard. And I've always had an underbite, right? Mandibular prognathism, and it's ugly. I won't lie. Girls, when I was trying to get dates, would tell me that I was kind of ugly, and that made me feel bad. I didn't apply Stoicism. I didn't know about Stoicism, and I wish I had it because my self-esteem sucked. But things like that, going bald, being ugly, those things really really put me into a funk in my early years. But then I learned, hey, there's nothing I can do about either one of these things without tens of thousands of dollars in surgery, and that's just not, I'm just going to be how I am, screw it. And I started to become more resilient then when I accepted that fact. There's nothing I can do to change this, and all I can do is have a better personality. All I can do is be the most interesting me that I can be. And that kicked in my early to mid 20s, especially once I got to grad school and really figured out that I had a lot of friends for the first time in a long time in grad school, like-minded, sciencey people. And it really helped to draw me out. And then I got to focus rather than on that aspect of life. I got to focus on what I wanted to do when I got done with school, and planning thinking about what am I good at? Where are my passions? What am I good at? And I figured out that I like research, but I don't like grant writing or anything like that. And that teaching seemed to fit me pretty well. And I pursued that path. So I'm still a bit of an outdoorsy person when I can. I claim to be anyway. And I'm now a father as of 2016. Met my wife after moving to Arkansas. She's from Oklahoma, and we've been together now. It'll be 10 years next year. So life changed. Life sped up, I think, when I had a kid, because I focused so much on things at home that time kind of slips past. You lose contact with culture and what's cool and what's hip, and you begin to not give a damn. And I think Stoicism is a way to navigate the waters of life, no matter what phase you're in, whether you're in that awkward "who am I" phase, or the "I know who I am, but how do I get through this" phase, or you know who you are and where you're going, and you don't want to let society drag you down phase of life. And so my next stage is to really become the best dad I can be. I've tried, but I've devoted more time to what did Marcus Aurelius say about being calm, or what did Seneca say about being happy, than I have to what would a really good dad be doing right now. Maybe I should put down Marcus Aurelius and get on the floor and play tractors. And so that's where I'm going next. I want to be the imperfect good person rather than the perfect prick that hides away. And we'll see if that affects the show in some ways as well. So those are my reflections as I cross the threshold into my 4th decade on the planet. And I'm going to go have a piece of cheesecake, have an adult beverage, and listen to some bad 80s music. And I hope you'll join me again next week when we pursue the good life with the Sunday Stoic. Carpe diem.
Thank you for listening to the Sunday Stoic. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review the Sunday Stoic on iTunes. Become a member of the Sunday Stoic team, earn rewards, and be an integral part of the show by becoming a patron at www.patreon.com/SundayStoic. Contact the show by emailing sundaystoic@gmail.com or by leaving a voicemail at 501-503-3132. To find out more, visit www.sundaystoicpodcast.com. And as Steve always says, carpe diem.